In March 1985, at Guadalajara International Airport, something happened that should not have been possible. In broad daylight, a wanted cartel figure arrived openly. No disguise, no rush. Armed men stepped out with him. U.S. drug agents were already there. Weapons were raised. An identification badge was shown. Seconds later, safeties clicked back on. The agent stood down. This wasn't a chase. It wasn't an escape under cover of darkness. It was a public display of leverage. And it came just weeks after February 7, 1985, when a U.S. drug enforcement agent disappeared in Guadalajara, Jalisco, triggering one of the most sensitive investigations of the era. The timing mattered. The location mattered. What unfolded at that airport revealed that a boundary had shifted long before anyone was willing to say it out loud. The man at the center of that moment did not begin as a kingpin. He was born on October the 24th, 1952, in La Noria, Badiraguato, Sinaloa, raised in poverty and drawn early into an illicit rural economy. By the late 1970s, he had transformed scattered fields into industrial-scale operations across Chihuahua and the Golden Triangle, helping power a cartel that functioned less like a street gang and more like a corporation. Scale brought money. Money brought protection. Protection bred confidence. But confidence can harden into miscalculation. In November 1984, a major raid dismantled one of those flagship operations in Chihuahua. What followed was not restraint, but escalation. By March 1985, the conflict had moved out of the shadows and onto an airport tarmac. This story isn't about admiration. It's about how power is tested, how lines are crossed, and how a single day, a single airport standoff, set a countdown in motion. What followed would reshape the pursuit, harden the response, and make clear that nothing could be contained the way it once was. If you value carefully documented stories like this, focused on facts, context, and consequences, subscribe to Hidden Archives to follow the next file as it unfolds. Rafael Caro Quintero did not come from chaos. He came from routine poverty. He was born on October 24, 1952, in La Noria, Badiraguato, Sinaloa, a remote mountain village where farming barely sustained families, and the state was largely absent. When his father died during his teenage years, Caro left school early and took on adult responsibilities. By the late 1960s, he was already working within a rural economy where marijuana and poppy cultivation were not framed as rebellion, but as survival. At that time, Mexico did not yet have cartels in the modern sense. The trade was organized through small regional cliques, tied together by geography and personal trust. Caro moved between farms and transport routes, learning the basics: how crops were grown, who bought them, how they were stored, and how they crossed north. His early rise had little to do with violence. It had everything to do with learning systems. That education accelerated when he came under the influence of Pedro Avilés Perez, often described as one of the first figures to coordinate traffickers across the Golden Triangle of Sinaloa, Chihuahua, and Durango. Avilés emphasized logistics over spectacle, control over chaos, consistency over impulse. Those lessons stayed with Caro. By the mid-1970s, Caro stopped thinking in terms of small shipments. He began thinking in terms of scale. He acquired land across Chihuahua, invested in irrigation systems, drilled wells, hired agronomists, and introduced methods that stabilized yield and quality. He did not invent sinsemilla or seedless marijuana, but he was among the first to apply it at an industrial level. Potency increased. Demand in the United States followed. What had once been scattered fields became coordinated production. Then came 1977. That year, with U.S. backing, Mexico launched Operation Condor, deploying the military across the Golden Triangle to eradicate drug crops. Entire communities were displaced. Small growers were wiped out. But for traffickers with money and protection, the operation produced an unintended effect. It eliminated competition and forced consolidation. Survivors moved operations away from the mountains and into urban centers, most notably Guadalajara, Jalisco. When Pedro Avilés Pérez was killed in 1978, a new alliance solidified. Alongside Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, Caro became a founding pillar of what would later be known as the Guadalajara Cartel. Each man had a defined role. Gallardo managed political protection and coordination. Fonseca handled regional relationships. Caro oversaw production and cash flow. The structure was deliberate. The organization operated less like a street gang and more like a corporation. Routes were shared, fees were collected. Violence was restrained when possible. And at the center of the economic engine stood Caro Quintero. Between 1979 and 1984, that engine reached its peak at Rancho Búfalo, a vast marijuana plantation in Chihuahua. Thousands of laborers worked the fields under coercive conditions. Output reached levels that dwarfed anything seen before. The scale of the operation made one thing clear: it could not have existed without protection. This was no longer a hidden enterprise. It was a statement of confidence, money, and assets. By the early 1980s, the scale of Caro Quintero's production translated into wealth. Few traffickers had accumulated at that point. U.S. and Mexican investigators estimated his fortune at hundreds of millions of dollars, though no figure could be conclusively verified. What mattered more than the total was how that money was distributed. Investigations later linked him to dozens of properties across Jalisco, Sinaloa, Chihuahua, Sonora, and Zacatecas, ranches, warehouses, and urban residences. Some assets were registered in his name. Many were not. Cash was funneled through transport firms, cattle operations, and construction businesses presented as legitimate. Ownership was fragmented on purpose, designed to limit losses when seizures occurred. That wealth was not simply display. It bought time, warnings, and silence. Officials were paid to delay action. Routes remained open. Problems were reported early. For years, money acted as insulation, but it also created records, rivalries, and expectations. As the fortune grew, so did the number of people dependent on it and the number of points where the system could fail. While the Guadalajara Cartel expanded into cocaine trafficking through Colombian connections, attention from U.S. authorities intensified. In 1982, a DEA agent named Enrique Camarena was assigned to Guadalajara. Camarena focused on infrastructure rather than street-level seizures, tracking land, protection networks, and financial flows. His work led to multiple operations, culminating in November 1984, when Mexican forces raided and destroyed Rancho Búfalo. For Caro, the raid was not just a financial setback, it was a rupture. Years of investment vanished in days. More importantly, it exposed cracks in the protection he believed was secure. Inside the cartel's world, embarrassment carried weight. On February 7, 1985, Camarena and pilot Alfredo Zavala Avalar were abducted in Guadalajara. What followed remains one of the darkest chapters of the drug war. Later investigations and court rulings identified Caro Quintero as a central figure in an interrogation that escalated beyond control. Their bodies were recovered on March 5, 1985. From that point forward, containment was no longer possible. As pressure mounted, Caro made a decision that stunned investigators. In March 1985, he went to Guadalajara International Airport in daylight. DEA agents were present. Weapons were raised. Identification linked to Mexico's former intelligence service was shown. The agents lowered their guns. Caro boarded his plane. It was not a covert escape. It was a demonstration of how power had been allowed to operate. Within days, he fled Mexico, moving through Sonora and entering Costa Rica on March 17, 1985. There, he lived openly near Alajuela, attending public venues and renting property. the sense of immunity did not last. On April 4, 1985, after a traced phone call linked to his companion, Costa Rican authorities arrested him. He was extradited back to Mexico. Later, in 1985, Caro gave a televised interview from custody. He denied being a criminal, minimized his role, and framed himself as a rancher who had made mistakes. It was not an admission. It was the beginning of a narrative he would repeat for decades. In 1989, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison, the maximum under Mexican law at the time. The Guadalajara Cartel soon fragmented. From its collapse emerged new organizations, including the Sinaloa and Tijuana cartels. Violence escalated nationwide. The system Caro had helped build no longer needed him. On August 9, 2013, after 28 years behind bars, a court ordered his release due to a jurisdictional error. The decision triggered immediate backlash. Days later, Mexico's Supreme Court issued a new arrest warrant. Caro disappeared before it could be enforced. During his years as a fugitive, U.S. authorities placed a $20 million reward on his capture. Intelligence assessments differed. Some claimed he had returned to organized crime through the Caborca region. Others doubted his operational role. In 2016 and 2018, he gave clandestine interviews, denying leadership, claiming poverty, and stating he would surrender only if presented with concrete evidence of new crimes. On July 15, 2022, Mexican naval forces captured him near Sinaloa, ending a 9-year manhunt. The operation was overshadowed by a helicopter crash that killed 14 Marines involved in the mission. Rafael Caro Quintero did not dominate Mexico's criminal world through terror alone. He scaled it, organized it, and financed it. And when that system exceeded its own limits, it discarded him. What began in isolated fields ended in public view, on a runway, and later, behind bars, leaving consequences that continue to shape the conflict today. Rafael Caro Quintero's story doesn't end with his capture. It ends with what his rise made possible, and what it couldn't prevent. He gained influence through organization, money, and protection, inside a system that tolerated it for years. When that balance shifted, the protection faded, and the system moved on. What remains isn't a legend. It's a lesson about visibility, miscalculation, and the cost of believing power is permanent. If you follow stories grounded in dates, places, and consequences, without glorifying crime, subscribe to Hidden Archives. More case files are coming.